Page 46. At the Battle of Omdurman, the entire Sudanese army was annihilated without once having got their enemy within gunshot. The art of killing from a distance became a European specialty very early on. The arms race between coastal states of Europe in the 17th century created fleets that were capable of achieving strategic goals far away from the home country. Their cannons could shatter hitherto impregnable fortresses and were even more effective against defenseless villages. Pre-industrial Europe had little that was in demand in the rest of the world. Our most important export was force. All over the rest of the world, we were regarded at the time as nomadic warriors in the style of the Mongols and the Tartars. They reigned supreme from the backs of horses, we from the decks of ships. Our cannons met little resistance among the peoples who were more advanced than we were. The Moguls in India had no ships able to withstand artillery fire or carry heavy guns. Instead of building up a fleet, the Moguls chose to purchase defense services from the European states, which thus were soon in a position to take over the part of rulers in India. The Chinese had discovered gunpowder in the 10th century and had cast the first cannon in the middle of the 13th. But they felt so safe in their part of the world that, from the middle of the 16th century onwards, they refrained from participating in the naval arms race. Thus, the backward and poorly resourced Europe of the 16th century acquired a monopoly on ocean-going ships with guns capable of spreading death and destruction across huge distances. But most of the inhabited world at the beginning of the 19th century lay out of reach of naval artillery. So it was a discovery of great military significance when Robert Fulton got the first steam-driven boat to head up the Hudson River. Soon, hundreds of steamers were to be found on the rivers of Europe. In the middle of the 19th century, steamers started carrying European cannons deep into the interior of Asia and Africa. With that, a new epoch in the history of imperialism was introduced. This became a new epoch in the history of racism. Too many Europeans interpreted military superiority as intellectual and even biological superiority. Soon, steamers were no longer used as tugs of the fleet, but were equipped with artillery of their own. The gunboat became a symbol of imperialism on all the major African rivers, the Nile, the Niger, and the Congo, making it possible for Europeans to control huge, hitherto inaccessible areas by force of arms. Until the middle of the 19th century, small arms in the Third World were able to measure up to those of Europe. The standard weapon was a muzzle-loaded, smooth-bored flintlock musket, which was also manufactured by the village smiths in Africa. The musket was a frightening weapon for those hearing it for the first time, but its range was only 100 yards. It took at least a minute to load the gun between each shot. Even in dry weather, 3 shots out of 10 failed, and in wet weather, the musket ceased functioning altogether. A skilled archer still fired more quickly, more surely, and further. He was inferior only in his ability to shoot through armor. So the colonial wars of the first half of the 19th century were lengthy and expensive. Although the French had an army of 100,000 men in Algeria, they advanced only very slowly, as the arms of the infantry on both sides were quite comparable. But with the percussion cap came a musket that failed only 5 shots in 1,000, and then accuracy improved with grooved barrels. In 1853, the British began replacing their old muskets with Enfield rifles, effective at a range of 500 yards and firing more quickly because the bullet was enclosed in a paper cartridge. The French brought in a similar rifle. Both were used first in the colonies. But these weapons were still slow and difficult to handle. They emitted puffs of smoke which revealed where the marksman was, and the sensitive paper cartridges absorbed the damp. The soldier also had to stand up while reloading. Prussia replaced its muzzle loaders with the breech-loaded Dries rifle. This was tested for the first time in 1866 in the Prusso-Austrian War over hegemony in Germany. During the Battle of Sadowa, the Prussians lay on the ground and with their Dries rifles fired 7 shots in the time it took the Austrians standing up to load and fire 1 shot. The outcome was obvious. A race now began between European states to replace muskets with breech loaders. The British developed the paper cartridge into a brass cartridge, which protected the gunpowder during transport, kept in the smoke fumes when the shot was fired, and hurled the bullet 3 times as far as the Dryce rifle did. In 1869, the British abandoned the Enfield and went over to the Martini Henry, the first really good weapon of the new generation, swift, accurate, insensitive to damp and jolts. The French came next with their grass rifle, and the Prussians with the Mauser. Thus, Europeans were superior to every conceivable opponent from other continents. The new arms made it possible even for a lone European traveller in Africa to practice almost unlimited brutality and go unpunished. The founder of the German East Africa colony, Karl Peters, described in New Light on Dark Africa 1891 how he forced the Wagogo people into submission. The chieftain's son came to Peters' camp and placed himself, quite unembarrassed, in the entrance of Peters' tent. At my order to remove himself, he only replied with a wide grin and, quite untroubled, remained where he was. Peters then had him flogged with the hippo whip. At his screams, the Wagogo warriors come racing in to try and free him. Peters fires into the heap. Before Peters leaves the village, he has the Wagogo told that they now know him a little better. He intends to stay as long as any one of them is still alive, any village is still standing, and any ox remains to be taken. The Sultan then asks to hear the conditions for peace. Tell the Sultan I do not wish for any peace with him. The Wagogo are liars and must be eliminated from the earth. But if the Sultan wishes to be slaves to the Germans, then he and his people may possibly be allowed to live. At dawn, the Sultan sends 36 oxen and other gifts. I then persuaded myself to grant him a treaty in which he was placed under German supremacy. With the aid of these new weapons, colonial conquests became unprecedentedly cost-effective. In many cases, expenses were largely limited to the cartridges needed for the killings. A new generation of weapons quickly followed, rifles with repeater mechanisms. In 1885, the Frenchman Paul Vierly discovered nitroglycerin, which exploded without smoke or ash, and this meant the soldiers could remain invisible as they fired. Other advantages were its greater explosive effect and relative insensitivity to damp. The musket's caliber, 19mm, could be reduced to 8mm, which dramatically increased the accuracy of the weapon. The automatic rifle also came with the smokeless nitroglycerin. Himram S. Maxim manufactured an automatic weapon that was light to carry and fired 11 bullets a second. The British supplied their colonial troops with automatic weapons early on. They were used against the Ashanti in 1874 and in Egypt in 1884. At the same time, with the Bessemer method and other new processes, steel had become so cheap it could be used for the manufacture of arms on a large scale. In Africa and Asia, on the other hand, local smiths could no longer make copies of the new weapons as they had none of the necessary material, industrially manufactured steel. At the end of the 1890s, the revolution of the rifle was complete. All European infantrymen could now fire lying down without being spotted, in all weathers, 15 shots in as many seconds at targets up to a distance of 1,000 yards. The new cartridges were particularly good for use in tropical climates, but on savages, the bullet did not always have the desired effect, for they often continued their charges even after being hit 4 or 5 times. The answer became the dum-dum bullet, named after the factory in Dum Dum outside Calcutta and patented in 1897. The lead core of the dum-dum bullet explodes the casing, causing large painful wounds that do not heal well. The use of dum-dum bullets between civilized states was prohibited. They were reserved for big game hunting and colonial wars.